Hey guys, welcome to my third video on this channel. I don't know how long I'm going to count the amount of videos that I do, but this is the third video. Today I will be doing a video about rereading Catching Fire 9 years later. I did one of the Hunger Games last week. Today is this guy's turn. Not really going to do the intro story bit. I did it last week, so I don't feel like I need to do it again. Anyways, I'm prepared a little bit better this time. I wrote down what I'm going to say. Last time I had so many parts. I talked for so long and I cut it down to like a tiny bit of me speaking. Anyways, so it says, sparks are igniting. Flames are spreading, and the capital wants revenge. Ooh. Against all odds, Katniss has won the Hunger Games. Hooray! She and fellow District 12 tribute Peeta Mellark are miraculously still alive. Katniss should be relieved, happy even. After all, she has returned to her family and her longtime friend Gale. Yet, nothing is the way Katniss wishes it to be. Gale holds her at an icy distance. Peeta has turned his back on her completely. And there are whispers of rebellion against the capital. A rebellion that Katniss and Peeta may have helped create. Oh, you think? Much to her shock, Katniss has fueled an unrest she's afraid she cannot stop. And what scares her even more is that she's not entirely convinced she should try. As time draws near for Katniss and Peeta to visit the districts on the capital's cruel victory tour, the stakes are higher than ever. If they can prove, without a shadow of doubt, that they are lost in their love for each other, the consequences will be horrifying. In Catching Fire, the second novel of the Hunger Games trilogy, Susan Collins continues the story of Katniss Everdeen, testing her more than ever before and surprising readers at every turn. What strikes me, spoilers by the way, the summary explains the plot of maybe the first tiny part of the book, like the entire second Hunger Games thingy, where victors of previous games have to compete again. None of it is mentioned. I wish I didn't know that. There are a bunch of cool like twists in the book that I wish I have forgotten. When I reread the Hunger Games I didn't really mind, but this one had a lot more like twists and turns and Anyways, I have 6 points this time. And it's going to be a lot shorter because overall I feel like this is just the Hunger Games 2.0. Like the Hunger Games, which is slightly different. Anyways, that leads us to point 1. So I feel like this book, like the Hunger Games itself, is very fast paced and it just goes on and on. But the plot in this one is even more fast pacing. Like the whole victory tour Katniss and Peeta have to go on is described in a couple of chapters, which I guess is one of my only real complaints. The first half of the book goes so fast, we don't really have a moment to pause, even though so many things happen. Like Katniss realizes that she has to go back into the arena. We see her break into this house and then basically get drunk, but that's it. Or when Gale gets whipped in the square, we don't. Well, afterwards he gets treated and everything, but I feel like we never really have moments of Katniss just doing some self-reflection. We just go with the flow together. Also, she broke her leg or arm, and she had to stay in bed for like a long time, and it just gets flown over so fast that it is more like a mention in passing. But it is also not slow enough to really be a scene, if that makes sense. It's like this weird in-between kind of thing that happens a lot during the first half. I'm not the biggest fan. Time goes really fast, so we can go to, well, it feels like we can go to the arena and the Hunger Games quickly, which I understand because a lot of people like the Hunger Game part of the books the most. I guess I just happen to not really. I really liked looking at Panem and how it is changing and how the people were changing. I really love to see when they were on this victory tour how there was this underlying uprising going on, and Katniss really had a hand in it, even though she didn't want to. She just wanted to live her life, do good deeds, which wasn't really allowed. I liked how Snow really had or tried to have a hand in it. The fact that Snow was more involved made me feel like it was bigger. It wasn't just Katniss trying to survive, it's Katniss being a part of something greater, and I don't think she really realized it at that point, what was really going on. Speaking of, I'll talk a little bit more about it later, but she was also really changing as a person. I liked seeing that she was more open and emotional. It was kind of funny how some people really didn't like her, and then the contrast with Peeta, who was generally liked by people, even though Katniss is like the one chosen to be a representative of this revolution. It gives a feel of like there are more consequences to actions than in the first book, where it was basically just her surviving, and now it's more like there's more at stake. Her mother, Prim, Gale, Peeta, like everyone around her can be in danger unless Katniss plays this new kind of game, if you will. Like there's the Hunger Games, but there's also the big political part. On top of it, there's a lot of like imagery in the book, like the Mockingjay symbolism. The catching fire is like, I think, a metaphor for how like the revolution is catching fire. A lot of times things are described as like the small flame that starts to build. I like writing like that, not the over flowery like his eyes are diamonds that are doing something in a universe, but I like it when there's just sprinkles of like metaphorical language in a book like here. So yeah, I do really like that there seems to be more I have to take care of these people kind of vibe to Katniss in this book, rather than I am the main character and I have to survive. This book is a setup for something bigger, which I want from a middle book in a trilogy or the second to last book. I want this book to really lay out what's at stake here very slowly, and I loved how we got this delivered in a way where Katniss is part of something bigger and she doesn't realize it. The reader also doesn't know, so until the end. Speaking of the end, just like the metaphorical language, I feel like there is a lot of clues sprinkled throughout the story that I didn't really understand when I read it. But now I do, and I'm like, ah. A great example is when Plutarch showed his pocket watch to Katniss and it had like a Mockingjay on it, and he wanted to obviously tell her that he was part of her plan even though she doesn't have a plan, and that he was on her side and she doesn't realize it. As a pre-teen / teenager reading it for the first time, I was just like, huh, it'll make sense later on, but now that I reread it, I was like, yes, he's going to do the thing in the end, you know, like District 13 is alive and they're going to start a revolution, and it was fun to know what it meant. Or like the fact that he showed it and to tell her that or to give her a hint that the arena was a clock, stuff like that. And then obviously the ending comes. Katniss shoots the barrier, but then especially when she wakes up and she walks in on Haymitch and Plutarch conspiring, and we have this entire District 13 is still standing, the uprising has started. Weirdly enough, I felt like a second-hand happiness for past me, if you will, because I know what was going to happen, but I had this spark of, I remember what it felt like to read this for the first time and be like, oh snap, now we've really started. This one definitely delivers on raising the stakes right before your finale, and it is one of my favorite endings of a book that I can think of on the top of my head. So I already talked about it in my previous video, so I won't delve on this too long. Same with like the next couple of points. I feel where in the first book I didn't really mind the love triangle, but sure, and like I could see some thematic use of it. It is not a good finished product, if you will. Either I wanted her to be more confused, which is logical because she's in the middle of puberty and an uprising, which she unintentionally is partly responsible for. So it will be totally 100% realistic to see her just struggle with feelings of love and friendship in general. But instead we get this like these scenes of Gale and Peeta chasing after her, and she doesn't know what she wants. And the thing is, there is this uniqueness to Katniss and Peeta's love arc, because they basically pretend to be in love and they play up the romance to survive. The fact that Snow plays up Katniss's almost double suicide is like this crazy act of love, and the fact that it ties in with like trying to suppress the people and then it backfired. It is such a cool hook to just develop into a romance. And the love triangle, if you will, comes chiming in like, hey, don't forget about this trend. We don't need your love triangle. Like, that's also why I don't really... I'm tapping. That's also why I don't really like just Gale romance in general. He would be such a good, like, best friend. Because he does give Katniss things that Peeta cannot give her, like a spark, if you will, like kick up her butt from time to time. And some energy, but I don't like how there's this feeling all the time that she has to choose between the two of them. I would have loved to see Gale to just be a friend. Yes, I'm Team Peeta, whatever. With Gale, I wish we could see something like that, but just a friendship. I don't know if I'm making sense. I'm rambling on too long anyways, let's continue. Well, first of all, the world is seen as even more brutal. There is this scene where Katniss goes to a party and the people there puke so they can eat even more, and the contrast with like all the poor families in District 12 and the other districts as well is so in your face. I like it. That being said, something I didn't really touch on in my last video is like there are quite a few parallels with like ancient Greek and Roman. For example, the Roman upper class, like the tiny 1%, would also like just stuff themselves and eat excessive amounts of food, while the lower class like basically starved or was really hungry. The Hunger Games, gladiator fights, and then we can even go further and see the uprising as like some kind of Spartacus reference, because you know he also was a gladiator who like caused an uprising and escaped with a bunch of other ones. I didn't really think about these kind of things when I read this as a teenager. Wow. Do I even dare to say that studying literature does make me look differently at books and stories? Speaking of stories, there's this story about the Minotaur. I don't know if you know it. I'll be very brief, but I think 6 or 7 children have to be sent to this labyrinth every year so the Minotaur can eat them, and someone eventually helps them escape. And it is kind of cool to see like a parallel with how someone like Plutarch in the games, who knows how the labyrinth works just like Daedalus, to see them use their knowledge to help people escape the contraption they built as well. And then also kind of a parallel with modern society. Obviously there's the Hunger Games are a reality show. What is shown in this book is that the winners are kind of perceived as like higher entities above the people in the victory tour. For example, they look up to Katniss as if she's someone special, which we also tend to do with reality stars ourselves. It's an interesting parallel to think about. I already spoke about Katniss in my previous video, So again, I will be brief. She is changing. It is nice to see through her, if you will, the contrast between like all the riches that she has now, yet she has like a very messed up state of mind. She has nightmares, there's like PTSD. She tries to not remember the game. For example, when Peeta shows his paintings and they're all Hunger Games related stuff, and she just kind of freaks out. There's a lot of consequences to all the actions and things they go through. I feel like YA books tend to kind of dismiss these consequences or brush them off. Like the main character will oftentimes always do what is right and be very selfless and just battle on, and then after everything's over they will celebrate and things, well, obviously there's always like a loss, like a character dies, or the cost of the battle barely seems to be the mental state of the people. Well, when you are part of something as big and violent and horrible as the Hunger Games or an uprising, you will be scarred. And for example, Katniss like doesn't get the lover in the end of book 1. She and Peeta have like this conversation, and then Peeta turns his back, and book 2 opens with just the two of them still being very separate. Or Katniss reaches her goal. Her family is, well, basically she saved Prim. Her family's better off, but she's very disconnected from that world that she created. I think the primary audience of this book doesn't really crave that, yet it gives it to them anyways, which I really like. I think it is more an adult thing to crave, though. I don't think teenagers... I don't know. Are you a teenager? Do you want more of a realistic mental issues after the battle kind of thing? Or do you like a satisfying, yet there have been some sacrifices, but everything went well eventually kind of ending? Do I make sense? I'm asking a question. So Katniss is growing up in a way, and I still like to see the world through her eyes, especially when she doesn't realize stuff, or the fact that she only cares about a couple of people around her. She still is a very interesting perspective to follow. The most striking difference between my perception of this book now versus when I read it for the first time 9 years ago is definitely that I appreciate certain points in the book more. The stakes are higher, there is symbolism that I see now. Panem is changing. I think that was my favorite part, to just see sprinkles of... Obviously I wanted more, but to just see this world grow. Actions have consequences. Katniss has PTSD. Katniss's evolution makes sense. The ending is great. I wish I didn't know how it ended. That's it. Did you reread the trilogy? What about you? How do you feel? Especially since like the prequel has been announced to the trilogy later this year. Are you going to reread it? What are your what are your thoughts? Thanks for watching. I will see you next week. Bye.